Hi, I am back after a few weeks away for another episode of Old Testament Tuesday. This one might be a little bit longer because I kind of want to show you the arc of the life, the events in the life of David, king of Israel. Because the book of 2nd Kings, I've crossed over into 2nd Kings, and the entire book encompasses David's life from the death of Saul and Jonathan to his death, to David's death. So there's a very definite arc, a rising arc of David's success, his favor, his fame, that culminates with delivering the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and then God actually making covenant with him to have an eternal dynasty, which we know is what happened with the Christ being the descendant of David and the true Messiah that was prophesied. So but going back, just kind of recapping the events of the first several chapters of 2nd Kings or 2nd Samuel, when David hears about the death of Saul and Jonathan, he's deeply grieved because he loved them in spite of Saul being so awful to him, Saul clearly being his enemy for a very long time. David was a very loyal person, and Jonathan had been loyal to him. So he deeply grieves and writes a beautiful song of mourning and of honoring King Saul and Jonathan and the fallen of Israel, because that shows you that David still has this very tender character that is after God's heart, and he hates to see God's anointed fallen. So he sings this. He's not only king and prophet, but he's also a gifted psalmist and songwriter and worship leader. So he does this. He grieves publicly over Saul and Jonathan. The citizens of Judah shortly after this and ask him if he will serve as their king. So they anoint him king at Hebron. Hebron's a fascinating place. It shows up a lot in the Old Testament. And if you've been to Israel and have the opportunity to stand on a hill and look out at that city, you can still see the ruins of this ancient city. It's kind of eerie to look at. So David served as the king of Judah for 7 years in Hebron. And then during that time, there were still all kinds of battles between Judah and Israel, the other tribes of Israel that were still loyal to Saul's family. So after much intrigue and betrayal and treason and murder and death and bloodshed on the battlefield, finally the people of Israel are vanquished, and they approach David and ask him to be their king as well. So David is anointed king over all the tribes of Israel. He moves his headquarters from Hebron to Jerusalem. Then a foreign king, Hiram, sends materials and labor to build David a palace in the city of David. So now David has a palace. He has control over the entire kingdom, the entire land of Israel. And the only thing that is missing is the Ark of the Covenant. And he moans that he has a nice house to live in, but the Ark is still not where it belongs. So he makes 2 attempts. The first attempt turns out to be traumatic because it wasn't being done properly according to the law of Moses. The second time they do it properly, and the ark is installed in a tent in the city of David. So now everything is in place. The king is in place, the ark is in place. Everybody loves David. It says in chapter 5, verse 10, and David became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him. In chapter 7, we see a dialogue between Yahweh and David. God speaks through the prophet Nathan to David, and makes some very extravagant promises to him. He says, "This is what the Lord Almighty says: I chose you to lead my people Israel when you were just a shepherd boy, tending your sheep out in the pasture. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have destroyed all your enemies. Now I will make your name famous throughout the earth." And listen to this next part. In light of what we know Israel to be today, the nation of Israel. And I'm not saying that this is an exact equivalent, that he was speaking of the nation of Israel that we know today, but it kind of gave me shivers when I read this. "Now I will make your name famous throughout the earth, and I have provided a permanent homeland for my people Israel, a secure place where they will never be disturbed. It will be their own land where wicked nations won't oppress them as they did in the past, from the time I appointed judges to rule my people, and I will keep you safe from all your enemies." It's just kind of fascinating to me. If you did want to apply that to what's going on right now, because that's what the fighting is about. Is Israel entitled to this permanent homeland? Well, according to 2 Samuel chapter 7, this was God's promise through David. So David then prays and gives thanks and praise to God. He humbly lays down before the Lord, and he says, "Oh, how great you are, O sovereign Lord. There's no one like you. There's no other God. We have never even heard of another God like you." His praise is just so heartfelt and bold and huge, right? Because he knows why he is successful and why he is famous. And why he is prospering in everything that he tries to do, because the Lord, his God, is with him. Then David, I just add this little tidbit to just show that David remembered his promise to Jonathan to show kindness to Saul's family when he came to power. So he makes arrangements for Jonathan's son Mephibosheth to come and live with him. He's a crippled man, but he has, Saul's family still has a lot of wealth, so he has one of Saul's servants make sure that all of the land and the crops and everything are taken care of for Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth is going to come and live with David at the palace and dine with him at his table every day. And it just, again, shows David's heart. So why am I sharing all this? Because sadly, one event happens, and it centers around lust, where David typically would go out to battle whatever enemy was at hand in the spring. When kings would go out to battle, that was their custom. He stayed home. He hung back, and he takes a nap, and then he takes a stroll on the roof of his palace, and he sees Bathsheba bathing, and he lusts after her. He sends for her. She comes. They have sex. She conceives a child. First time, right? So, I'm sure most of you are familiar with what David does at that point that changes the whole arc of his story after and begins to his downfall. Not that God allows him to fail, but what God does allow is that, knowing that David brought a curse on his own family, that there would be, I need to find it. Briefly, after David just finds out that Bathsheba is pregnant, he does this whole conspiracy to have her husband killed on the battlefield. And he's very just callous about it. When he finds out that his plan to see Uriah the Hittite, Bathsheba's husband, dead, Joab, his commander, comes and tells him that yes, he's gone. He's just kind of, he tells Joab not to be discouraged. The sword kills one as well as another. Fight harder next time and conquer the city, as though this plot, they're kind of wink wink, this plot never happened, and oh, that's too bad about Uriah, when David was the one that orchestrated his death. So that kind of action was contrary to David's character, but it came about because he succumbed to his lust for Bathsheba. After that, the rest of the book is just like, it's horrible. One of his sons rapes Tamar, one of his daughters. Tamar's brother, Absalom, takes vengeance and kills Amnon, the one that raped her. His own sons start to rebel against him and try to jostle for power and make coups against the throne. There's just story after story after story after that sin, with that great sin, and after being confronted with it. Now, when he's confronted with it by Nathan, Nathan tells him this parable, and we know from Jesus that parables are powerful ways of teaching a lesson. And Nathan forms this parable about a rich man that had lots of sheep and a poor man that had only one beloved little pet lamb, and the rich man takes the pet lamb and kills it to serve dinner to his guests that are passing through. When David hears this parable, he says, we must do something to bring justice against this man who did this terrible thing. And Nathan says, you are the man. And so David is not going to he's not going to lose his throne. He's not going to lose the covenant, because when God makes a covenant, he doesn't break covenant, right? But Nathan tells him, the Lord has forgiven you. When he confesses, the Lord has forgiven you, and you won't die for this sin, but you have given the enemies of the Lord great opportunity to despise and blaspheme him, so your child will die. The child that he had conceived with Bathsheba winds up dying. Other consequences are that he fasts and prays for the baby after it's born, but it dies anyway. And you start to see how this brought a curse on the rest of his reign over Israel, and especially it brought the sword. What Nathan said was, the sword will not depart from your household. So I guess my message today in laying out these stories about David is that, we hear it said sometimes that people's giftings can bring them places that their character can't keep them. Well, David in his early days had both character and tremendous gifting. He was gifted in every way, and he also showed great character because he was fully submitted to God. It only took a day, a really bad day of weakness and sin to bring a curse on all of that had been so glorious and great and so positive for the people of Israel. So the enemy does not have to come up with all kinds of creative ways of bringing down God's people. Lust, greed, anger, violence, all the same stuff that happens in these Old Testament stories are the same things that he uses today. So it just shows us how mindful we have to be about temptation and about taking heed to what our hearts are doing, because our hearts can lead us places that can bring a curse, can bring big consequences, not only for us, but for our children, our spouses, our churches, our communities. So we have to maintain our standing in Christ is secure, but our state can fluctuate, and we are capable of making choices that do away with any kind of good that we've been trying to do in our lives to serve God. It causes the enemies of God to mock Christians. Every time a man or woman of God has a moral failure while serving in ministry, it does more and more damage to the reputation of the church and the reputation of Christ. And so we have to guard our eyes, guard our minds, guard our hearts, and not allow sin and covering up for sin to destroy what the Lord has allowed us to build.